Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you're located. Before we start, I'd just like to remind everyone to make use of the chat function that you can see on your screen on the side. This will be a great way for you to ask any questions during the webinar, but we'll also feed these to our speakers at the right times. So don't worry about trying to get your questions in at the right times. We can make sure we bring it up. If for any reason you lose connection or have to exit the webinar early, don't worry, as we'll be sending you a recorded version. So today we're taking a look at 3 scenarios of how different teams across cyber defense have had to work together to mitigate specific threats over the last year. And for us, it marks the first of an annual review that we're calling the inner workings of cyber defenders. So hopefully you can all see us. Hopefully you can see myself, Mark, and Nethaniel. I'd like to start off with some introductions. I'm Ben Chant, Global Product Marketing Manager here at CyberProof. Today I'm joined by Mark Vaitzman, Senior Information Security Analyst. Give everyone a wave, Mark.
Yeah, hey.
And also Nethaniel Ribco, Senior Cyber Threat Intelligence Analyst. So guys, do you want to give some introductions?
Yeah, let me start. So my name is Mark. I'm located in Israel. Was born in Russia. I am a senior cybersecurity expert in CyberProof for the last half year, a bit more. In my previous job, I was managing the security services in a very innovative EDR vendor. And I'm also a course guide in a national cyber program for teenagers before their army service. And I'm glad to be here today.
Awesome. Yep. So I guess now it's my turn.
Yeah.
Welcome everyone. My name's Nethaniel. I was born in Uruguay, so Spanish is my native tongue. I've been in CyberProof for a year and a couple of months. I have altogether, I would say, 5 to 6 years of experience in cyber threat intelligence and intelligence research. And we actually work together a lot with Mark. So it's actually great to be here and be able to show you all of the work that we do together, or some of it.
Thanks, Nathaniel. So let's just dig into the agenda for today. So what we'll do is we'll start off by going to some of the advantages of a more collaborative approach to mitigating threats, not just in terms of being able to get the right threat intelligence, but also to be able to work collaboratively across multiple teams. We'll cover exactly which functions and use cases are involved in these 3 scenarios that we'll go over today. The first scenario will be focused on the detection of targeted mail spam campaign. This is a particularly interesting one, as it actually looks at exactly how one indicator can actually mean a much larger exploit is in place, and how it can often be missed if you don't take the right actions and coordinate with the right teams. We'll then go into the second scenario, which looks at intelligence leads from the threat intel team, how they monitored black marketplace of particular malware that was able to exploit employee credentials. And then the third scenario will look into the use of EDR detection. This is a slightly more complex, but nevertheless persistent type of scenario. So I suggest you stick around to see what happens in that one, because it's very interesting. And then we'll go into actually overlaying that scenario with the meter attack and dig into a little bit as to why that's important. And then we'll finalize this with some key takeaways, and we'll also facilitate some questions. So as I said, please do drop some questions in if you want to ask us, and then we can get through those throughout the call, and any left over, we can cover those off as well. So what do we mean by this statement? Don't review the threats, review the steps. Well, there's been a rather ironic trend in the cybersecurity industry where end of year threat intel reports, threat reviews, however you want to call them, are created by cybersecurity companies and distributed to their customers, which in many cases is actually taking sort of a one step forward, two steps back approach, in that it will list all of these different threat scenarios, attack techniques, and even go to huge amounts of depth into those specific attackers and adversaries. But it won't necessarily cover the steps that defenders need to take. So we've actually gone a step further, and we're piloting a report that seeks to review these threats over the past year in the form of the defense steps that need to be taken, and actually looking from the defender's perspective and point of view. So you can see a bit of a preview there on the right, and we've actually attached this report to the webinar as well, so please feel free to go and download it. This is a pilot which is focusing on 3 scenarios, and it goes into some more depth on what we're covering today, especially around the meta tactics and techniques. This is important because it's covering the mitigation steps, not just the attacker steps. So that's really what we mean by reviewing the steps as well. And it means that you're able to understand exactly what those strengths and weaknesses are of your different functions, of your SOC analyst, your DFR team, CCI team, and how that works together with the rest of your team that are also included as part of that incident management process. You know, even to your SIM engineers, your EDR engineers, pen testers, ethical hackers, and your threat hunters, etc. And really, the point here is that there's no single remediation that is done in isolation. So this is not something which should be taken lightly, because it's incredibly important. And no matter how many tools you may have in terms of capabilities of automation and analytics, cloud-based security, machine learning, AI, you won't get the full use out of them or the return of those if you're not able to coordinate across multiple teams and bring in the right skill sets. So we're going to go a bit nerdy now and actually characterize some of the teams that were involved in these 3 use cases. And we'll list exactly the type of activities that they conduct, and then we can dig into the actual scenarios themselves. So with this, I'll pass on to you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks. So I really like these icons, and I think they really represent the teams. And I'll start with the L1 analysts, which are the swordsmen. This is the first line of defense. This team is actually going through a tangled field 24/7, looking for suspicious indicators in the alerts that they can get from different security systems. This team usually has a basic operation system internals and networking understanding, and one of their main roles is getting escalated the right incidents and the right indicators in time to the next team, which is usually L2 analysts. As you can see, the knights in gold. This is actually my team. I'm representing this team. And this team, the L2 analysts, usually has a higher analytic capabilities. They are getting into this cyber warfare and analyzing the incident and trying to handle it from the start to the end. And they actually, one of their main roles is to be the focal point collaboration, to move it forward to the next teams and make sure that it comes back into one place. And one more important thing that L2 analysts should have is actually experience in multiple security products, since most of the alerts are coming from different security software, and you need to get the collaboration between the different systems and the alerts. Yeah, Nethaniel, to you, your team.
All right. So my team, the Cyber Threat Intelligence team, We are represented here by the wizards, which I think is pretty cool. So what we do is we use a toolkit to basically bring light to the deepest and the darkest places of the internet in order to find pieces of important information, data that will allow us to anticipate upcoming cyber attacks in general, and also particularly to our customers. So it really entails um, digging deep and special capabilities to be able to gather all of this data. And then we have what we call here the archers, which are the threat hunters, who are the ones looking for the threats inside of our customer's perimeter. So just like a hunter knows the right techniques to catch a prey, so our threat hunters know the right way to identify a malware based on the signature, based on different behaviors, and other different threats using their own methodology. So that's the archers here. And the next team that is involved is the Dfir Specialists, the guys in charge of the forensics and the incident response, who are represented by the knife men. Because with the knife, you need a bit more precision, which is exactly what the Dfir team does. They need more precision to break down an incident, extract the indicators out of it from any artifacts they found, and map the malicious behaviors that they were able to recognize. And the data that they gather is then shown with the rest of the team and used in an incident response process of basically remediating the incident that's in hand.
Yeah, and the last chapter in this list is actually the SIEM or EDR engineers. They're actually the blacksmiths, and they are kind of building the tools for L1, L2, and the other characters. They are building and adjusting the rules for the security systems for the EDR as well. And usually they're using all the information gathered from different teams during the investigation of an incident to be able to adjust and make the rules more accurate for next time.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Nethaniel. So let's put this all together into the first scenario, the detection of a targeted mail spam campaign. So this scenario actually entails the CyberProof CTI team, who are asked by a client to monitor the web for signs of leaked data that could be used in cyber attack campaigns. So to summarize this really was the CTI team getting a lead in to subsequently discover email addresses in a public server that were being used in a large mouse spam campaign. So this is really related to leveraging that threat intelligence for a data leakage type use case, and then how do you work with the rest of your team to mitigate that threat. So I'll pass this over to you, Nethaniel, to start off.
Yes, thank you. So as Ben said, this is actually a really interesting incident. When we were performing some research on one of our customers' online assets, we discovered an open server that was exposed to the public, and inside this server we found various TXT files that contain hundreds, I think even millions of email addresses. And among all of these email addresses, there were hundreds and hundreds of them that belonged to one of our customers, which is very, very strange. We didn't know what was going on here. So we analyzed the server, the open server, to see what it is, where it's located, what's the IP address, what are other indicators that we can extract from this finding, and be able to further investigate, and also to see what is it that we're dealing with here. What's the nature of this server, basically? Once we gather all of this data, we escalated it to L2 analyst, in this case to Mark.
Yes. So getting all this information from the CTI was very important, and we took all these IOCs, did some initial analyze for the IP. We got an understanding that this is maybe an emailing server, and we conducted an investigation in the customer's environment. We actually were able to find a lot of mails coming from this IP, and then we got more indicators. We could see the emails itself, the subjects, and the sender. And while investigating this, we could find not only this specific IP, but another subnet with just the same 3 bytes IP that were sending a lot of malwares as well during a few weeks. And actually, these emails were all phishing, and we were able to immediately respond and block these IPs and senders. But on the other hand, we could get a lot of indicators that were able to get back to the CTI and investigate further to try and find the campaign. This is an example of the phishing email. There was pretty the same, all of them, same format, a bit of different text inside. But hopefully this information helped the CTI to continue the investigation and find the campaign. Yeah, Nethaniel, to you.
Right. Yes. So once we got that information from L2, and while they were still handling it, and when we already knew that, okay, this is an actual spam campaign that's going on, and our customers are receiving spam from what we're seeing outside of the perimeter. So we wanted to understand how the spammers, the threat actor behind this campaign, where are they getting all of this massive amount of email addresses of our customer from? So we started to research and investigate and search where, in what hole of the web we would be able to find such large amount of email addresses. And actually, we found that there was a GitHub repository that was exposing the exact amount of email addresses that were targeted by the spam campaign. And this was really, really huge and really incredible to see one by one how that happened. And once we find this repository, we sent it back to the customer for them to already start a takedown and remove that exposed content from the internet. Obviously, threat actors have access to it, and they're using it maliciously, so a takedown would be the right path to take. And then back to you, Mark.
Yeah, so here, the SIEM engineer, we already have enough information from our environment. And actually, this campaign, as many other campaigns, phishing ones, are trying to send the emails in pretty low rate, so it will not be detected by the rules, and sometimes using subnets, I mean different IPs for the same purpose, and therefore here the SIEM engineer was able to tune these rules, get the threshold adjusted, and for example in this case searching the same subnet of the IP sending a big amount of mails. So in this case, we were pretty ready for the next campaign that will come. And
so once, sorry.
Yeah, taking all these indicators together and pretty closing the incident, we were able to get some more information back to the CTI.
Right. And we receive all of this data. And once we were able to understand exactly how the spam campaign works, and what are the different indicators related to it, so we started to look in this open server for any indications or mentions of other customers that we have. And we actually found that this spam campaign affected other customers. And then the circle started again. We sent it to L2. L2 looked for the indicators in the other customers' environments. And that was actually how this became bigger and bigger and bigger. And we were able to mitigate this with all of our customers. And a fun fact, after all of this was done, we were actually able to identify the actual source of the spam. We found who exactly was the person behind the spam campaign. It was actually a couple in India that they had some sort of illegitimate spamming business for different objectives, but that doesn't really change the outcome or the actionability of the investigation. But it's just really interesting to understand where everything's coming from and really give a full picture to our customers.
Yeah, thanks, Nethaniel. I think particularly with this scenario, an important takeaway is how critical it is to be able to match both the internal and external sources, which could actually end up meaning uncovering something much larger than first suspected. So making sure that you've got a shared platform in place. You'll hear us throughout the webinar refer to the CDC platform. That's our SOC platform, but we also use it as a collaborative environment for our customers to act as a hybrid SOC environment. And it means we're able to track all of this information, both external and internal, and continuously enrich that incident information as well. So I think that's one of the key takeaways, as well as the ability to be able to leverage our customer base to then actually be able to share that information and update the systems of other customers as well, whether they be ER rules, detection rules, which we can reinforce to other customer systems as well. So here's a bit of a summary of that scenario. As you can see, it includes all of those steps that we're taking. As I said, we can go into more detail if you download the reports, and you can also see this particular scenario, how it worked, etc. So on to scenario 2. This is actually a scenario where, whilst proactively monitoring the dark web on behalf of one of our clients, our CTIT team actually identified a potential threat within the customer's environment. So our threat analysts collaborated with the L2 team and the client side team, who we were actually in a hybrid model with, to be able to identify the threat and mitigate the damage. So I'll pass over to you again, Nethaniel, to start us off with this.
Sure. So this was also a really interesting event that we had. We were monitoring our usual sources, some hacking forums, and we found that a threat actor posted in one of the most prominent hacking forums. There are a few of those. He posted that he was offering for sale a long list of email credentials of C-level employees and executives of hundreds of organizations, and he was offering that for sale to the highest bidder. Due to the previous activity that we identified from this specific threat actor, we had really strong suspicions that they were using the Azure-root malware to steal the credentials. And also, due to the nature of one of our customers, we were pretty sure that they could be affected by this breach, by this leak. So that's how we triggered this incident, this investigation. What you're seeing now is a screenshot of the post that the threat actor did in this forum, saying that he's selling the email password for Office 365 credentials of people in position of C-level. So you can imagine how sensitive these credentials can be and what a huge threat they pose to any organization, really. So once we had all of these hypotheses put down, so we started to gather IOCs and Yara rules of Azerult to action them and then to escalate them. And we also, apart from searching for all of these indicators that could be afterwards researched and looked for inside our customer's perimeter, we also search in several black markets that we cover in the dark web that are known for selling stolen data, data stolen by the Azerult malware specifically, and other botnets as well, for any mentions of our customers in those black markets to see if we were actually affected. Basically, an indication from outside telling us if we have something inside. And once we gather all of that data, the IOCs, the Yara rules, etc., we escalated that to the L2 analyst.
Yeah, so since we in this step we still didn't get any indicator for compromise, we took all these IOCs provided by the CTI and ensured that these are implemented into the EDR as hashes, as well as other indicators, and we're able to implement some detection rules for techniques that are known for Azerult. So again, in this stage, we still didn't get much information from our environment, and therefore we involved our threat hunter. So the threat hunter took the Yara rules that were provided by the CTI and customized it a bit to be more accurate and related to the customer that was checking for. The Yara rules were executed in the environment. At the same time, we recommended some password resets and first step of response, enabling and ensuring that the MFA is enabled for these accounts, checking some activities by L1 at this time for the C-level accounts for any suspicious or anomalies behavior. And finally, the Yara rules got some of the indicators and moved them up to the DFIR, to the forensics. So at this stage, between the threat hunter and the DFIR, the indicators of Azerult, the latest versions, were also divided into the techniques, MITRE techniques, that will make the DFIR work much easier to analyze the ICs and the new signature. If it's a new version of Azerult, it's been updated pretty often. And finally, making sure that we have all the information for the SIEM engineer to make the rules that were already implemented in the previous step more accurate and correct.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, here's a bit of an overview as to those key steps that we just covered as well. So right from the lead from the CTI team, who were able to detect that leakage, attribute it to the Azerult malware, and then search for the indicators of compromise and Yara rules, escalating it to L2, then able to implement the relevant hashes into the EDR. And I think, as you can see, there were multiple teams involved in this particular scenario, but again, it just shows that you can see that arrow pointing down from the mitigation between DFIR and customer, the importance of then reinforcing that learning into the detection and response workflows with other customers as well. So That was particularly useful in this scenario for us and for our customers. For other teams out there, it's also important to whether this may be a different situation. It's not necessarily for other customers, but it may be for other entities within your business, other subsidiaries, and for updating various controls in different environments as well. I think another key takeaway is being able to have the right kind of use of automation as well. One question we've just got actually is around the typical time that it would take if you didn't have these various teams versus having multiple teams like this. Even if you're working in a hybrid environment, if there's a customer that's already got an internal secure operations team, may have L1, L2, but they're bringing in external help to cover threat hunting, DFIR, CTI, etc. Maybe this is one question I can pose to you, Mark. What's the typical sort of time frame that it would take to actually maybe quarantine or detect the threat in the first place, and then actually go through the alert triage, investigation enrichment, and containment, versus if you didn't have these teams in place?
Yeah, so first of all, just for the scenario too, you actually I'm not sure you will get into these steps, because if you will not get all these teams before the CTI and the threat hunter, you probably even may not get into this ever. But generally, usually I would divide it into two steps. The first step is the initial detection and the time you get until you escalate it to L2, which is usually the first point of escalation, and given the first response, that is in worst case is quarantining endpoint or server, or blocking the process, which is usually would take using L1 and L2 and the other teams up to 20 minutes or 50 minutes, and up to 50 minutes, I would say. Sometimes even faster, depending on the initial investigation and the quality of the alert. And then you probably will have some more time when you're a bit more relaxed and the endpoint is already quarantined or the process is blocked and you don't have any damage or critical damage currently. So have a bit more time to get the investigation around the initial vector, where it came from, and if you have any other places in the environment that affected. And it may take a day plus minus until you closing all this loop and getting into usually the last step is the SIEM engineer to get the adjustments. So it may take a day, maybe a bit more, a bit less, but just generally, if you will not have this collaboration in different teams, you probably will have much more load on one team, which will have much more time investigating each incident and will not be able to do this fast escalation to the next team, which is L2, to get the important incident, and in this time getting into others. So yeah, it may take a minimum of few hours, I believe, about 2 or 3 hours, just to get the initial response, which is very critical time.
Yeah. Great, thanks for that, Mark. Gives a good insight into the amount of time that could be saved. I want to move on now to the third scenario. This one is probably the more complex, but potentially the most interesting scenario. And this one, as you can see, is covering the EDR detection of an iced ID Trojan infection. But it actually includes the steps that the attackers took to masquerade themselves, and the steps that we had to take to be able to uncover that. And it's also really interesting because actually this is starting from an alert generated by the EDR system. The previous two scenarios was starting off with a lead from threat intel, whereas this one may be a more common scenario where an alert comes from a particular system to know an analyst, who then needs to bring in other teams to help investigate, validate, verify that information, and take action as well. So I'll pass on to Mark to go ahead with this one.
Yeah, thanks. So just a few words before I'm getting into. In this scenario, you actually will be able to see in each step when you're getting more and more understanding of the threat, and not always you're getting all the information from the first step, unlike usually we have from CTI. So in this case, the L1 analysts were monitoring the system and got an alert with the high severity for a process injected with Cobalt Strike payload. Cobalt Strike payloads are very famous among all different kind of infections and malwares. So in this case, we got a process that was injected with Cobalt Strike payload. The L1 analyst is initiating the first step of investigation, collecting evidence, any suspicious activities on the endpoint, and they are actually identifying a suspicious CNC communication and taking all these first initiated investigation and the indicators and passing on to L2 while keeping the investigation on their side. So here we can see some screenshots of the file that actually was not known in the wild at the time of this investigation. So it was a bit more complicated to understand this, but this is very classic way of masquerading the file, giving it some fake metadata, as you can see here, garden root basic season. This is not a real thing. It's just a name. Another name we could see later on is a WinInit, which actually tries to be similar to WinInit and trying to evade some detection or trying to hide itself. As well as we could see that this file is recognized with some domains we could find with the CNC, and we could see that most of the files recently detected for this IP are Cobalt Strike shellcodes. So this is actually make us very familiar that we're doing a deal with Cobalt Strike payload, definitely. Already at this step, we were able to understand that this is a true positive, a real incident, and we quarantined the endpoint. We actually did the first investigation also to check that it didn't spread to other endpoints. So from here, we could make our initial investigation in L2 and find out where this process came from. We were able to find that it was originated from an attachment in an email, actually a zip file, which included a malware enabled, a doc file enabled with macro. We actually will be able to see in the next slides. Yeah, so this is one of the communications we were able to see, and while investigating the communication, we were able to see that it's actually trying to download this specific script. The script is obfuscated, as you can see, but we could find some hints in the shell in this shell code. What is the obfuscation actually? So we used the CyberChef tool with a specific receipt to try and deobfuscate it. So we got over the first step of the deobfuscation. Usually this having a few, we could see an IP. While investigating the IP, we were able to see that it tried to download and install a backdoor, ANSYS agent backdoor, a pretty old one, but a working one. Another analyzation of this file, we used Integer as an online source, a pretty nice tool to see the gens or reuse of a code. We're able to see a lot of Cobalt Strike as well as Meterpreter and other packers. And the other screenshot you can see, the black one, is actually the malicious document with the macro enabled on open, meaning once you're opening this document, the macro will execute itself. And actually, this macro was executing and creating the file with a cobble strike injection that the EDR detected. So taking all these indicators, we gave it to the CTI, as always, trying to involve them. They're having a lot of nice information for us.
Thank you very much for that, Mark.
So before we move on to that stage, just want to remind everyone as well that if I'm conscious we may be moving through multiple steps. So if there's anything that you want to clarify, or if there are any questions you want to ask, please do feel free to post them in the questions tab. Sorry, Nathaniel, carry on.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Please ask any questions you feel like you want to ask. Okay, so having this information that was provided to us by the L2 analyst, so knowing also that it's the ISID banking Trojan, so we were able to do a bit more investigation. We knew, because we follow a lot of malware trends, etc. So we knew that the ISID stealer it was having a moment, even though it was first discovered on 2017. We know that it was doing a comeback, and we actually were able to find a few different ISID campaigns that were being distributed with phishing emails. So with all of that information, we started to break apart all of the IOCs that were provided, and we were able to find more and more IOCs that we could then feed back to L2 and the rest of the SOC for actioning and making sure that they are having this under control. Yes, back to you.
Yeah, so at this step, we already have a lot of hints that it might be related to an ISID campaign according to the CTI findings. But just in order to validate it, we involved the Dfir Specialists, which conducted the remote analysis. Just a reminder, the endpoint is already quarantined, but we still have the option to make a remote analysis, usually using the EDR. So the remote analysis was done on the infected machine. A lot of other artifacts were found that might be related to this malware. And finally, these all were pulled out and investigated by the DFIR. Also checking what kind of activities these executables were trying to do, and validating that it actually was not done properly, and we successfully blocked it. Yeah, and so in this step, the DFIR actually validated this is very, very similar to SID, the previous versions of SID, and the threat hunter came in to try and find more indicators to make sure that we're talking and messing with ISID and what actually it already completed, and do we have any damage done or not. In this case, the threat hunter actually was able to find an SQLite DLL file. This is actually a legitimate, a real SQLite DLL file, but it's very known for ISID and some other banking Trojans to use this DLL in order to query the browser's databases, where you actually, all of us, saving a lot of very important information like passwords to different sites. So this is what this SQLite was built for, and it was found in a temp. Of course, there was no other indicator of using SQLite on the machine, so it was pretty straightforward that it was used by ISID. And finally, taking all of this and using all the techniques for the newest ISID versions, the SIEM engineer was able to create specific rules to detect these techniques and fine-tune some of the existing rules to be able to catch these specific activities and alert for ISID or any other banking Trojan activity.
Thanks, Mark. You know, the the particular takeaway that I just want to highlight from this scenario again, and whilst I'm covering this, I'll bring this up on the screen to give you a good overview as well, was that this actually initially came from an alert in the EDR system to an L1 analyst, and it essentially needed that validation from the CTI team to investigate similar activity being carried out by adversaries using external sources as well, something which the SOC analysts won't necessarily have access to. There may be specific enrichments they can get from threat intel platforms that are integrated, but in order to understand the behavior of related adversaries or campaigns that are taking place in the dark web and in various forums or across the clear web as well, and then be able to contextualize that and communicate that back to the SIM engineer L2 to then put in the right containment steps and to put in the right mitigations, and then reinforce that learning again for the future is incredibly important. So I think this is kind of a common scenario where there's certain teams who won't necessarily have CTI staff internally for themselves, but they will look to bring in CTI experts from partner. This is where we sometimes help our customers as well to augment their team with CTI team, DFR team, with threat hunters, or even to maybe automate the L1 and collaborate with them on L2 and L3 as well. So a really good example of that. We did get a question in just asking if this slideshow will be available afterwards, because some of the graphics are a bit blurry. So apologies for that. You can actually download the report, which has the high-res versions of these diagrams and the screenshots themselves. So you'll be able to see those more clearly. This particular slideshow will also be available as a recorded webinar as well, so that will be sent to you afterwards. So this is particularly difficult to see, I understand that, mainly because it's quite difficult to be able to lay this out with all the different techniques that are involved. Again, this is a lot clearer in the actual report. Bear in mind that the report that's attached to this webinar is a pilot of the report that we'll be looking to do annually. So please do send us feedback, suggest anything which you think needs some more depth as well. The idea is to expand this annual report to include other scenarios as well, and other attack scenarios. So with this particular scenario, this is actually the third scenario that Mark and Nethaniel already covered. This is just showing an example of what a meter overlay would look like. So what it would look like to actually overlay this scenario and map it to the steps taken by the attacker as well. And this is, particularly important in order to be able to make sure that that the incident life cycle is also in line with the life cycle of the SOC and the rest of the cyber defenders as well. Because then that means you're able to improve those actions and be able to identify where those weaknesses are, where some of the more delayed responses are, and then be able to highlight areas of improvement as well. I don't know if Mark or Nethaniel, you wanted to emphasize anything here as well?
Not specifically, just saying that meter mapping is very important in my opinion, generally in this incident and generally as well. This helps us and the SIM engineer as well to be sure that everything is covered for the next one, for the next time.
Yeah, great. And just conscious we've got about 10 minutes left. What were some of the key takeaways? So we've given a list here. I think the overall theme really for this webinar is make sure you're able to collaboratively respond across multiple teams. These are just some of the examples of of where we've worked closely with different teams in the SOC, to the CTI teams, to our threat hunting team, and how that works together with the customers team as well. The first point is really around the integration side of things with different data sources and technologies. And I think in terms of integration, it specifically and probably most importantly highlights the enrichment and the ability to use that enrichment to take action. So if you want to search for specific IPs with VirusTotal, for example, and look up the IP reputation for that particular threat, for us in CyberProof, our analysts can actually leverage the virtual analyst bot, CMO, who automates some of those enrichment steps. So he's able to actually go in and conduct those external queries or scan a network using existing firewalls and email gateways. And this is kind of the real benefit of having that level of automation orchestration, is the ability to then integrate with your existing environment and analyze those malicious files without having to go to another system to run a manual scan. I think, was there anything else you wanted to mention, Mark, before we move on to any others?
Just for this point or for the others?
Yeah, no, just for the integration side of things.
No, nothing to add. I think you covered it.
Yeah, and another one of the key points is really to be able to have that feedback loop as well. So that's really the third point there, capturing relevant data both internally and externally for future improvement. And I think we demonstrated through these scenarios the ability to have threat intel analysts that can check several black markets and indicate the patterns of behavior that should be monitored to L2 analysts, for example, and engineers and incident responders to then update those use cases, or even to the threat hunting team, who's then able to check whether they've already been compromised. In doing that, they may notice misconfigurations or recommend any important updates that need to be made as well. And I think the scenario we covered, this was a case with specific privileged accounts as well. So that may be also important for that. The second point is really the importance of using a centralized platform, and you may have heard us mention the CDC platform. That's our service delivery platform, which enables us to work collaboratively with multiple teams. So it actually helps us to be able to work across our own internal teams as well as the customers, to store that data, have transparency into operations, but also to really accelerate that collaborative remediation. There's even a chat ops capability built in to be able to talk in real time with different stakeholders. And then I think the final point is probably what sums up this whole principle of being able to work collaboratively with different teams, adopting what we call a hybrid engagement model to access those maybe specialist teams that are needed by you to augment your internal team as well. Was there anything else that Mark or Nethaniel you wanted to cover in terms of those takeaways that maybe I may have missed?
I would just add about the second point for centralized platform, and not only getting all the different teams into one place and managing the incident in one place, including all of the gathered information and data. It also helps me a lot when I'm doing the post investigation of the incident and when I want to create a report for this. So everything is already in the same place. It's just very easy to make a report out of this, represent it to the customer, sometimes represent it into a webinar like we did today. It's very nice when everything is in one place and you don't want to run between emails and chats and different
reporting to execs, right? Reporting to an executive leadership as well, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, I think we're almost out of time. I think we've answered all the questions that we got in today. So I hope this was all useful. Thank you everyone for joining. We've got more materials like this, which you can see on our website under resources. We've also got page called Solutions, and you can go onto that and see the different areas where we look to provide some useful materials, educational materials, and insights into how you can cover those specific challenges. So this was under the theme of how to help augment your team. If you go into that solutions page, you'll see other related materials as well. That's hopefully helpful, and we'll be uploading this to that page as well. We'll shortly be uploading some of the attachments that we mentioned as well, such as the deck and report afterwards. So hope you enjoy this. And thank you very much for taking part. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Nethaniel. It was very useful, and hope to speak to you all again soon.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.